and welcome to tonight's Congressional 9 debate, hosted by the Towns County Republican Party and their chairman, Betsy Young. Tonight's event is taking place at Hightower Creek Vineyard in beautiful Towns County. With me, I have our candidates, Mr. Andrew Clyde and Mr. Matt Gurtler. Gentlemen, welcome. We're grateful to have you this evening. Tonight's forum consists of a 2-minute opening statement, a 2-minute closing statement. Each of these gentlemen will be asked a series of questions. During that time, they'll have 1.5 minutes to answer the question. If they are called out by their opponent, they'll have 1 minute to rebut. If they are in the middle of a statement when time is up, they will be given time to complete their statement. By toss of a coin prior to tonight's proceedings, Mr. Matt Gurtler will have the opening statement first. And so the opening statement is yours.
Thank you. I'm Matt Gurtler. I'm going to be your next conservative congressman for Georgia's 9th District. I'm a Christian, I'm a home builder, I'm a husband to my wife Marissa, almost 2 years of marriage, and we have a 1-year-old, with this 1-year-old this Saturday actually, Olivia. I'm a home builder by trade. I graduated from the University of North Georgia. I got my degree in history there, participated in ROTC as well. I'm also an NRA firearms instructor, and I'm a 2-term state representative. I've been named Georgia's most conservative legislator for 4 years straight, because I'm a real Republican, and I lead by example. My record is what sets us apart in this campaign, that proven conservative fighter. I've never voted for a tax increase. I never will. I'm 100% pro-gun and author of constitutional carry, which is the most pro-gun legislation introduced in this state. And the only candidate that has an NRA A rating, also endorsed by the National Association of Gun Rights, and 100% pro-gun rating from Georgia gun owners. I'm 100% pro-life and also the co-author of the Heartbeat Bill, which passed last year. And I was only one of 5 Republicans that actually speak in favor of that bill. I stand with our president, put American values and principles first and foremost, cutting taxes and job-killing regulations, but also, importantly, bringing the troops home, having that America First foreign policy. I'm honored to have the endorsement of Students for Trump, as well as Rand Paul and many others. President Trump and the American people need a fighter with a proven conservative record of not only standing up to the establishment, but also the radical Republicans and the lame rhino Republicans and the Democrats as well. I have that record, and it's unparalleled, it's unmatched, and that's what we're running on, a proven conservative record, and that's what sets us apart. And I hope that I can earn your vote on August 11th in this important runoff election. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Clyde, and I'm running to be your next congressman. My wife Jennifer and I live in Jackson County. We're members of Prince Avenue Baptist Church, where I have served 2 terms as a deacon. I sing in the choir, and Jennifer, she plays violin in the orchestra. So I'm the gun dealer, and she's the violinist, and she adds culture to the family. Upon graduating from college, I was commissioned a U.S. Navy officer and served 28 years, both active and reserve, including 3 combat tours in Kuwait and Iraq. Upon completing my active military service, I settled down in Jackson County and earned a master's degree in business from the University of Georgia. In 1991, I started a firearms business. What began as a small hobby business in my garage has grown into a nationwide company with 2 brick-and-mortar locations here in Georgia. So as a veteran turned small business owner, I was truly living the American dream. Then everything changed for me. I had one of those defining moments. On April the 12th, 2013, the Obama IRS, without warning, wrongfully confiscated $940,000 from my firearms business. Come to find out, they've been doing this to small business owners all across the country through an unconstitutional process known as civil asset forfeiture. I challenged the corrupt IRS in court, and eventually I won, but I couldn't stop there. I decided to make it my mission to ensure this never happened to a fellow American ever again. So I went to Washington to work with Congress to pass legislation eliminating the ability of the IRS to confiscate legally earned money, saving hundreds of individuals and businesses from wrongful prosecution every year. On July 1st, 2019, President Trump signed our bill into law, the Clyde Hirsch-Sowers Respect Act. It was named after the 3 of us willing to stand up and testify against the corrupt IRS. We are in the fight of our lifetime against big government, and I personally experienced the brutality of it. So as your congressman, I won't back down. Again, I'm Andrew Clyde, looking forward to answering your questions.
All right, gentlemen. So as much as this is a forum, it's also a conversation. It's your turn to show the constituents of CD9 why it is, as the most conservative district in the Southeast and the 3rd most conservative district in the nation, why it is that you should represent them. So I'm going to give you the easiest question first for the evening. And that's as easy as it gets. After that, you're gonna have to distinguish yourself with policy, okay? So, Andrew, we're gonna start with you. Is Andrew okay for me to call you that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. What are the most important challenges facing our country, and how do you propose to address them? Our country, and how do you propose to address them?
The most important challenges, I think we are losing our conservative edge as a country. And I think the liberal left, if we do not truly take a stand, then I think the liberal left will take over, and we will begin to see socialism being dominant in the United States. And I would stand against that. I would stand with our president. I would stand to make our government smaller and more efficient. And I would stand for capitalism. I mean, we are a capitalistic country. That's what has made America great. Our foundation, what our forefathers built into the Constitution, was that individuals should be rewarded for their individual effort and given the opportunity to excel and do the best job they possibly can. So I think that taking on socialism and making sure that we maintain the republic that our founding fathers envisioned and created is probably the most important thing.
Okay, Matt, it's your turn.
I think.
Okay, Matt, it's your turn.
I think that there's a huge problem with corruption in our country, not only on the state and local, but the federal levels, especially when you see it happening. No one's following the Constitution anymore. No one respects it anymore. I ran for state representative because I wanted to bring true principles back into politics. And when I was elected, I came down to the state house and I maintained those principles, never voting for a tax increase, always upholding Republican principles to a T and natural and God-given rights. You know, limited government, conservative principles, individual liberty, promoting personal responsibility, and those small government principles that the founders enshrined in our Constitution. And no one respects it anymore. You can see this happen in the federal level. I have been facing the establishment and fighting against them for 4 years straight. That's why I was named Georgia's most conservative legislator, because I actually vote like a Republican should. And only at the ripe old age of 31, you can totally tell that if I was the most conservative representative in Georgia at 31 years old, and I've only been down there less than really 4 years, 4 years have become this January, I can really tell you we have a really big problem with Republicans not acting like Republicans. Of course, we have to combat socialists in the left. The natural proclivity of government is to grow and grow and grow. But you need hard standing fighters. They're going to go up to DC and they're going to take those hard stands. I've taken them over and over and over again, despite the political backlash and the smear campaigns against my candidacy in every single election. The last 4 elections, we're completely disingenuously attacked all the time because you stand on principle. I'm the only Republican that's actually voted against the budgets for 4 years straight and opposed all tax increases. So those types of hard stands we have to take. We have to go on the offensive. We have to go on the offensive.
Okay. I want to talk to you about elections. We know elections are really important. They are what sets us apart from a lot of countries who don't get to have a voice as to who represents them. During this pandemic that we have been in, there's been a lot of discussion about how elections get conducted. My question for you gentlemen is, what federal policies do you advocate regarding elections, campaign funding, and voting rights? And do you support mailing ballots to all eligible voters? Matt, we'll start with you.
I think there was in there, and I'll try. If I can get them all, I'll try. Of course, American citizens should be the only ones voting. Voter integrity is what holds our republic together. And we see a lot of corruption that happens in places like Broward County, for instance, probably the epitome of that, where these ballots, are not being counted, they're being destroyed. So as a federal representative, keeping the state officials accountable, the elections offices accountable, I think that's what all elected officials should do. We should have a higher moral and ethical standard, especially when it comes to elections. Mail-in ballots, if people want to request those, of course, we had about almost 7 million mail-in ballots happen during COVID-19 to Georgia. We had an unprecedented amount of people vote in the primary here. About 140,000 people voted in the 9th district, which is about 40,000 more than we expected, actually, traditionally. But that's what makes us a republic, getting people out there to vote. And of course, in this runoff election, voter turnout is going to be a key. A lot of people don't know there's another election until November. We know August is this election. But fundamentally, our elections should be secure and safe. Only American citizens should be voting. And I think that's just the American way to do that. And yeah, that's what I have to say about it.
Mr. Clyde. Mr. Clyde.
Thank you. I think we have to maintain the integrity of the election system. In order to do that, I believe that having valid photo identification is part of that process, because the people at the polls, the poll workers, have to be able to identify who the person is and make sure that they are a properly registered voter and that they are an American citizen. Otherwise, we could have people that are not citizens vote, and that would then disenfranchise those of us who are, and it would dilute the vote of the actual citizen. And I think that's wrong. I do not support mailing all voters a mail-in ballot, because a mail-in ballot can only be identified by signature and not by photo identification. So I think that increases the possibility of fraud when it comes to mailing everyone a ballot. I think that that people need to be able to, or need to come to the polls and have themselves identified as to who they are, so that everyone's vote is properly counted. So I think that's the way it should be.
Now, I've watched both of you gentlemen at multiple forums, and I know that you've gotten the immigration question, and I know that the question typically revolves around the wall. So, what policies do you support relative to immigration into the U.S. other than building the wall? Okay.
Mr. Andrew, you get the question first.
Well, thank you. Okay, so other than building the wall, which I am in favor of, and I would support the president to make happen all across the southern border, I think that people need to come here legally, whatever the process is, and I think that having lotteries is the wrong way to do it. I think that having a merit system, like our president has put forth, is the right way to do it. My mother's an immigrant. She immigrated from Canada. She married my father when my father was a Navy officer in the Korean War. And when he went up and taught a Bible school at a Bible college in Ontario, and when it was time for them to come back to the United States, she had to properly immigrate. So my mom came here legally, and everyone must come here legally. I do not support any sort of path to citizenship for people who are here illegally. Excuse me. No path to citizenship for those who are here illegally. So I think President Trump's on the right track when it comes to legal immigration and merit-based immigration. And again, unless we have a wall, we're not going to have a secure country.
All right, Matt.
For our policy decisions here, of course, I support the wall 100%. But there's also, the welfare state. Getting rid of the welfare state, that's why a lot of the immigrants come here illegally. Of course, we want legal immigration, merit-based systems as well. We've taken more immigrants than any and all countries combined. We have the greatest country in the world, and that's why people want to come here. But also, the welfare state is a big incentive, and these policies were in place by politicians and bureaucrats. And so you get to DC, you have to curtail those things, as well as defunding sanctuary cities. All those things combined is what's going to have a better immigration policy for us, because the people that break the law and that don't respect the rule of law, they are really disrespecting not only our country, but the people that are trying to do it right, the people who are going through the process. And so I think that's just the right thing to do. Get the wall, get rid of the welfare state, get rid of the defund sanctuary cities completely. That would be a good start.
Okay. COVID-19 threw our country into a tailspin. I think we all can agree that when March 13th that this year hit, none of us fully expected to have everything shut down. None of us expected that the world would come to a screeching halt. Are you satisfied with the federal government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic? If so, why? But if not, why not?
You know, COVID-19 is something that we could never imagine happened 6 months ago. And I think that what the president's trying to do is give the power to the states, which is under the 10th Amendment, which I think is a good thing. Each state to determine what's best for themselves. So I was glad to see that Georgia was one of the first states to open that back up, along with Texas. And so, you know, this is something that I had to vote on as well as a state representative. I was the only representative in Georgia to vote no to the emergency powers, to give actual unlimited powers to the executive branch, not because I didn't trust our governor, but it's because it's the right thing to do, and it's separation of powers. You know, we had 2 bills get on our desk when COVID-19 hit, and it was unlimited renewable powers to the executive, and there was a 30-day renewal. And, you know, being closest to the people in the House of Representatives, it was only reasonable and responsible to have a 30-day renewal back to the legislative branch to check the executive. This is Civics 101. Yet no one was willing to take the hard stand when 3 hours earlier they said they were never going to vote for unlimited power. Democrats and Republicans said this, and 3 hours later they all capitulated and everybody voted yes to the bill. But I stood alone, and the only representative in Georgia to vote no to that on the House and the Senate, which was was a tough thing to do. But we need people that are willing to take the stands, the hard stands, because that's the constitutional way to do it. And if I'm elected to Congress, those are the type of stands I'll take. As a congressman too, and the federal government, because there's not enough people up there that are willing to take those stands. But doing that is the only way to get back to a limited government, because we're going to lose our way.
Andrew?
We're going to lose our way.
Andrew?
Thank you. With regard to the federal government's response, I am not in favor of borrowing and borrowing and borrowing money in order to create a stimulus package. So I'm certainly not in favor of that. I think our president has done a great job, though, of leading in this crisis, in getting people back to work. This is basically an unheard of event in our lifetimes anyway. And so this has required some new and interesting ways to deal with it. I think our governor, Brian Kemp, has done an amazing job of leading this particular state. I think if other states would follow his lead, I think that our country would get back on track a whole lot quicker. Thank you.
Andrew, you mentioned stimulus. So what should the federal government be doing to stimulate economic growth and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic shutdowns?
Well, first, the federal government does not create jobs, okay? It's private industry and the capitalistic economy, that's what creates jobs. I think what the federal government can do is to get out of the way, and that is reduce regulation, which our president has done. In fact, I think he's reduced more and eliminated more regulation in the 3 years he's been in office than many of the presidents before him. We have been continually building regulation, and especially on small businesses, regulation is burdensome, it's costly, and it is unproductive. And so our president has done a great job of eliminating and reducing regulation. So to get the federal government out of the way, I think is the way, all right, to create a better economy and a stronger economy and a recovery from COVID-19.
Yeah, I have to remind my colleagues at the Capitol all the time about what the proper role of government is. It's protect life, liberty, and property, and that's about it. You know, cutting taxes, cutting job-killing regulations, reducing the size of government is what we're supposed to be doing right now, but protecting those core values and principles. The only way to get back to more prosperity for our nation, get back to a limited government, is to have free markets. You know, most of the bills I voted no against at the state capitol have something to do with the government going to give a handout to somebody else all the time. And I vote no 40% of the time. You know, out of those no votes, probably 60 to 70% of those votes have something to do with interference in the free market. About 80% of the lobbyists at the Capitol shouldn't even exist because they're only there for special interests. That's what happens in DC. So having that experience as a legislator for the past 4 years to actually combat this stuff is what sets us apart in this campaign. But ultimately, the only way to actually have prosperity for our nation is to follow the Constitution every time, 100% of the time, get back to free markets and reduce the size of government. because, every single day, the natural proclivity of governments to grow and grow and grow. And this is happening with not only the Democrats, of course, but the Rhino Republicans who are pushing through big government policies all the time. So you need someone there to actually take those stands and actually vote consistently. That's why I have been named Georgia's most conservative legislators. I've taken those stands.
All right, well,
You're back in the hot seat. We're going to change the topic just a little bit. We're going to talk about the economy. Okay? What federal policies do you support for a healthy economy and to help the broader American public improve their economic positions?
Well, what comes to mind is a piece of legislation that's called the Prime Act. This is something that Thomas Massey supports, and it's really simple. It allows the producers to actually sell their products to restaurants and consumers, the meat markets. Stuff like that we saw a lot during the COVID-19 where the trucking industry was deregulated some as well. And that's a great thing. And they said, well, why don't we always have this all the time? That's just less government. But federal policies, of course, we would like to have, no more debt added, of course. $26 trillion is unsustainable. It's going to keep going through. If I was in DC right now and we saw these stimulus bills coming up, I'd vote no to them because they have nothing to do with the coronavirus. About 75% of them have nothing to do with the coronavirus. But actually advocating for those principles, as a state rep, there's so much corruption that happens in the state capitol. There's so much corruption that happens at the federal level. They're going to try to hammer anybody or block their bills. Anything they're going to try to do to you, they've probably done to me. And the only thing that you can really do to be effective is have a voice in the vote and push your policies loud and clear and bold so that you can actually push through the policies that you want because it keeps them accountable. So as state rep, reducing the size of government through any type of legislation is what I'll advocate for, especially with the budgets, because that's one of the most important things that we'll pass in Congress is the budgets that add debt and to Americans every chance.
thank you.
I think what we need to do to stimulate our economy at the federal level is to have a balanced budget. What we need to do is eliminate the debt that we have. We constantly borrow and borrow and borrow, and somebody's going to have to pay for that sometime in the future. Well, our children or grandchildren are going to have to do that. So to have a balanced budget would be a great step forward, and then to start paying down the debt that we actually have. Take maybe 1%, they call it the penny plan. You take 1% of all the income that comes in and you pay down the actual debt that we have, because if you can't pay down the debt, it's going to continue to grow and grow, and eventually it will bankrupt us. As a small business owner, I understand what it is to live within my means and live within a budget. And so I would make those hard decisions to ensure that the federal government stays within its budget and actually has a budget. I would work with the other congressmen, build relationships with them to make sure that my voice was heard and to reduce the federal spending. And we can do that by eliminating some of the departments in the federal government as well, like the Department of Education. That education is not a federal responsibility, it is a state responsibility. So if we eliminated the Department of Education, that money then could go back to the states and the size of the federal government would be reduced.
Andrew, this question is coming to you. With the tax cuts passed in 2017 and the passage of the relief bill earlier this year, the federal deficit has grown by trillions of dollars. Are you concerned about the rising national debt? And if so, what steps would you support to reduce it?
Rising national debt, and if so, what steps would you support to reduce it? Little levity.
Okay, I think I just answered that question. That's all right, that's okay. Yes, I am very concerned about the national debt. And I would first make the tax cuts from 2017 permanent. All right, they are not permanent; they are currently temporary. Our Wuhan coronavirus epidemic or pandemic has put a kink in our president's amazing economy. All right, but we can recover from it. He helped this nation create the best economy in the world, and he will bring us back from that. And I fully support our president in that. But I allude to what I mentioned in my last answer, which is called the penny plan, where you can take 1% of the budget and pay down the debt, but you have to have a balanced budget first, okay? Because if you continue to borrow money, then all that's going to happen is you're going to add to debt, and you cannot continually add to debt. As a small business owner, I fully understand who began his business from scratch and now has a very profitable and nationwide company. I understand what it means to live within your budget. When you have to borrow money, you borrow, then you pay it back. You know, the federal government has to learn to pay back what they borrowed.
Matt?
Said that the greatest threat for our national security is public debt. As a fiscal conservative and the most conservative member of the state house, this is something that's very dear to me because I've been fighting these omnibus budget bills on the state level because they add debt to Georgians as well. We have about $1 to $1.5 billion have added to Georgians to the debt through these budget bills. So I've been the only Republican to vote against these bills and stand up and speak against them consistently for 4 years straight. And in DC, you need people to take those hard stands and vote against them and speak out against them because we're not going to have a country left. It's going to become insolvent. You know, we've got to eliminate many departments. I think there's way too many, of course. The EPA, the IRS, Department of Education, those are a start. But the government is just extremely big and intrusive. When I was up in DC, you could just see how many people there, their jobs shouldn't even exist. And the same thing that happens at the state capitol, you see all these people down there, and all we're supposed to be doing is protecting life, liberty, and property, and that's it. And so, you know, having somebody that has that record to get up there and do that, you know, that's when I've proven myself to do that. And the budget for me is one of the biggest issues in Georgia, and I've consistently stood up and spoken out and called them out for the corrupt budgets, and they don't like that too much. And so I'm probably happy that I'm leaving the House and I'm running for Congress now.
Economy, and we all agree that we want to have a vibrant U.S. economy. So, would you emphasize reforming tax policies? And if so, which ones and why? Matt?
Yeah, the biggest tax policy in the federal issue would be eliminate the IRS completely. You know that shouldn't even exist. This was in place in 1913. And it was supposed to be a very small percentage of people that would pay this tax. And then over time, now everybody's paying it. And intentionally, this is how the government grows anyways. And when something's put in place, you know, the next year they come back in and say, oh, we're gonna have to add to that a little bit more. You know, for instance, I voted against a bill in the state house, and it's sort of an example of how government grows just in the legislative process. There was a bill that would have a fee for about a $5 fee for these well drilling. It's going to happen in Georgia. And I said, no, that's a tax increase. Everybody voted for it except me. I went to the Senate. It came back, it was a $250 fee. It died for a year, but it was still alive. So it came back the next year, it was a $500 fee. And everybody voted for it except me every time. And so that's just a natural thing that when I'm talking about how government grows and no one's willing to take the hard stand. They say, well, it's just a little tax. You know, don't worry about it. But overall, on a macro level, this is how we've gotten to big government today because so many people did not take the hard stands. They said, well, I'll just compromise on this a little bit. And over time, compromise by compromise by compromise, we have a huge government today. So it's going to take a long time to get back. The people like Jim Jordan, Andy Biggs, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, people like myself need to be up in there because they're the proven conservatives that are fighting against this big government.
Andrew?
Okay, so how do you do this? I think you go to what's called a fair tax. And a fair tax is basically a consumption tax. With a consumption tax, you could then eliminate the individual tax return. When you eliminate the individual tax return, then you eliminate the IRS out of people's lives and you reduce the size of the IRS. So that's the way I would go about doing this. A consumption tax basically is a tax on what you buy. And if you don't want to buy anything, then you don't pay any tax. But if you want to buy a Cadillac, you pay the tax on a Cadillac. If you want to buy a Kia, you pay the tax on a Kia. So it encourages saving, but also I think it's very fair across the board. Then those people, then illegal income is also taxed. You know, those people who try and fly under the radar and make sure their incomes aren't noticed by anyone. Well, they've got to buy things too. So therefore, you pay the tax when you buy things. I think it's a great and fair way to have a tax system, because, you know, we have to have a government, we have to have infrastructure, we have to have a military, we have to have security. And I think that's the best way to do it, is a fair tax.
Okay, don't put the microphone.
What policies do you support to meet U.S. energy needs while protecting our water, air, and land for both current and future generations?
I would support policies that would create jobs, okay, but yet maintain a good environment for us, okay. One thing I don't support would be the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level. I think that needs to go back to the state level. The EPA is not part of the Constitution. It's not part of the 18 enumerated areas that the states have given to the federal government. So protection of the environment is a state issue. It's not a federal issue. So I think that that would be a good place to start right there.
Matt?
Free market solutions, you know, like Andrew said, I completely agree with that about getting rid of the EPA. That is something that I think we are going to agree on pretty much the whole campaign. But, you know, free market solutions is the best. It's self-regulating. People understand this. And that, you know, to have a conducive atmosphere so we can have jobs and have people working is the only way that we're going to, you know, be prosperous as a nation. And so the federal government role is really limited in this. And the 10th Amendment, everything not delegated to the federal, you know, to the states is reserved, or excuse me, to the federal government is reserved to the states. And the federal government's role is supposed to be extremely limited, yet we have a massive and intrusive government right now. This is out of control. I think everybody recognizes this. And I always go back to my point where, you know, we just allowed so much compromise to happen over and over and over and over the years. So we just have this massive government that taxes us to death. And, you know, we got to have people in there to stand up against that. But ultimately, free market solutions and anything not delegated in the federal government should go back to the states so that we can have more state sovereignty in general. And, you know, in the budget process I mentioned before, the long arm of Washington, as you say, holds a lot of money over the states through different programs and different things, and they tell us how we can, or what we can do, but we kowtow to them all the time on the state level, and that's not correct whatsoever. So you need a congressman that's going to fight up there.
Okay, here you go. Okay, here you go. I want to talk about police reform. It's a topic that has hit our nation hard. And in response to the national protests following the death of George Floyd, President Trump signed an executive order on police reforms. The order calls for improved credentialing of police departments, better tracking of complaints about officers who use excessive force, and better services to address issues like homelessness, mental health, and drug addiction. Will this adequately address concerns about police brutality? And if not, what other steps would you as a congressman take to advocate for police reform?
To start, and we commend Trump for doing that. You know, just at a Back to Blue rally with Congressman Doug Collins, you know, calling for the stopping of the looting and the rioting that was happening in Atlanta. You know, these Marxists, these socialists are destroying our property. They're not respecting the rule of law whatsoever. And we saw this happen in this CHAP or Chaz or CHOP or whatever it's called up there in, I think it was Michigan, where they took over 8 blocks and basically had their own autonomous zone. And yet no one was really held accountable. That's insane. You know, the mayor's there, you know, the state reps there, you know, the state senators, you know, those people, you know, they swear an oath to the Constitution to protect life, liberty, and property. Yet people were going around extorting people for money. There was assaults happening and all kinds of things that are unmentionables. But that right there, you know, as a congressman, as a state rep, or any elected official should be holding the bureaucrats and especially other politicians accountable for not going through and following through with their oath of office. If you're running a city and that allows you to happen in the city and you just allow it to continue like that mayor did, it's unacceptable. They should be held accountable. We see this happening on the federal level when the largest forces of government were using FISA courts and things like that to spy on our president, yet no one's really been held accountable. It's absolutely crazy. You know, if I'm elected to Congress, I'll be the guy that's going to call out the bureaucrats and the politicians that need to be held accountable. There's no double standard if you're a Democrat or Republican. Everybody needs to be held to the same accountability for this issues, and that's what I'll do. That's what I've done as a state rep.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think that the law enforcement reform, the police reform that President Trump proposed was very good. You know, I think our law enforcement officers need to be post-certified. I think that they need to have proper training. All right, and when you do find one that is a bad apple, if you will, then you concentrate on that and you take care of that one bad apple, and you don't castigate all of them and color them all the same color as bad. You know, law enforcement and police powers are primarily a state issue. They are not a federal issue. I'm not in favor of any sort of a federal police agency over the states. I am in favor of local law enforcement and state law enforcement handling that issue. I think protesting is fine. It's absolutely constitutional. It's what we do in this country when we have a grievance against our government. That's great. When it comes to rioting or property destruction or anything like that, absolutely not. When they cross that line, then those people need to be held accountable for that. And that is one of the reasons why my candidacy is supported by 10 of the sheriffs, endorsed by 10 of the sheriffs of our local district, of the 9th Congressional District. I have 10 sheriffs that have endorsed my campaign. I think that sets me apart from my opponent.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think we agree on that. Sure. Well, I mean, I think we agree on that. Everybody needs to be held accountable. That's fundamentally, and that's the only way that we're actually going to have accountability. With, for instance, at the state capitol, we have a very corrupt Speaker of the House. No one really calls him out. He has abused his power over and over. He's like the Tom Murphy of our day today. And I was the only Republican in 10 years to actually vote against him for Speaker. Also one of only 10 Republicans asking him to resign after the scandal broke last year. So that type of leadership is what we need in DC, that is not only campaign rhetoric, but you actually follow through what you do. And that's what I've done. Everything I've said I would do, I've done as a state rep, and I'll continue to do that as a congressman. I've done as a state rep, and I'll continue to do that as a congressman.
I want to talk about healthcare for a minute. And so, Andrew, this question is yours first. What type of health insurance policy should the federal government be pursuing? We all know that we were given the Affordable Care Act, which is not really affordable and is not very conservative at all. So I'm not going to ask the question of, do you favor a full repeal of the Affordable Care Act? Because I would hope that both of you running as conservatives, that would be a given. But what I am going to ask you with is, in addition to what type of health insurance policy should the federal government be pursuing, if you repeal the Affordable Care Act, what do you replace it with? Andrew?
Thank you. First, the federal government needs to get out of the healthcare business. Healthcare is not part of the constitutional responsibility of the federal government. So, healthcare should be the private industry is where healthcare needs to come from. And we need to have competitive plans and policies across state lines. I think that's very important. I think that will reduce pricing, reduce costs in healthcare. And so when we do that, I think we'll have better healthcare for all. I think we'll be able to have our own doctors. Yes, I think you should be able to keep your doctor. And the federal government stay out of it. So we need to definitely repeal the Affordable Care Act, which is not affordable at all. And we need to go to private health care plans that individuals and businesses can provide for their employees and themselves.
Okay.
We're actually going to have better health care in our country is have free markets. Obamacare should never exist. We should get out of it completely. We should repeal it completely. It's a state issue at best. If states want to do that, I would still advocate for a free market in healthcare on the state level too. That's what I've done as a state representative. The government has no place into it whatsoever. You know, when I talk about corruption, when you talk about Obamacare, and you talk about Rhino Republicans, you know, the Republicans said for 8 years, just give us the House, just give us the Senate, just give us the executive, and we'll get some things done. We'll defund Planned Parenthood. We will get rid of Obamacare. And then we got control of that in 2016 when Trump was elected, yet nothing happened for 2 years. And that really was a disservice. And that's really what we're facing with Rhino Republicans. They say one thing, they don't do it. They say they were going to do all these things, yet we couldn't uphold Obamacare. 8 years can't tell this. There was a guy that actually sued the Republican Party, I think, in it's up in northern state, because he said this is extortion. You guys, I gave you all kinds of money and to repeal Obamacare, and you didn't do it. And he's absolutely right. It's crazy. That's what we're facing with corruption, with these Rhino Republicans that don't really go through what they're doing. And so that's what sets me apart, is, you know, my proven record of actually being a Republican. I'm only 31 years old. I'm the most conservative representative in Georgia, just because I voted Republican for 4 years. It's crazy.
Okay.
So I want to ask you about Medicare and Social Security. What are your plans to protect Medicare and Social Security benefit programs and services that were paid for by individuals and that many people rely on for health care and sources of income to pay for critical living expenses? And sources of income to pay for critical living expenses.
You know, with Social Security, of course, we should honor the commitment that people paid in, for sure. Eventually, we're going to have to phase out through a process. But the people that paid into it and have given their money into it, and the government should keep that promise to them, of course. But we're going to have to phase out some of this completely, make it an opt-out program so people can choose to put their money in their retirement and things like that, where they would like to put it. It's a freedom issue, it's a liberty issue, and anything the government touches, as everybody knows, it's not too efficient, it's not too effective, it doesn't work very well. But a lot of the issues that I deal with a lot up here in the state rep is the VA, and we see this happen. I deal with a lot of veterans who call me all the time and they can't get the services they need. It's a government-run program. You know, if we want to really help our military and veterans, we should give them the money up to them and also help them try to facilitate that. But, you know, that's just one example of the inefficiency in government. With everything the government touches, it seems like it's a failure. It really is it's just hard to actually have efficient government. So that's why free market solutions are always better, you know, through communities, to individuals, and things like that. So that's what I always advocate for. It's the liberty stance for that. As a state rep, I've always voted in favor of any free market solution. You know, Americans for Prosperity always give me 100% on the bills, because a lot of the bills that we always come through are interference in the free market and think the government, they can do better than you can do. That's just not true. You need to have the least amount of government, so small that you don't even know it's there, and we'd be way better off.
Andrew?
To keep Social Security, we've had people pay in for years and years and years, and they should be able to get their investment back, and it should take care of them as they were promised. And those who are getting close to retirement age, exactly the same thing. Those who are going into the workforce, I think, need to have some options as well. I think that having some privatized solutions would be an option to look at. But I think it's very important also that the Social Security Trust Fund that we have be maintained and the money stay there. It's supposed to be gated and basically not available for any other branch of the government to borrow from. And I want to make sure that that stays that way as well, so that the Social Security Fund stays solvent and does not get its money borrowed. So I think that's very important.
Okay, before we do closing statements, is on foreign policy. Now, I've had the opportunity to listen to both of you gentlemen at various different forums. And so my question to you is, given your backgrounds, and each of you have varied backgrounds, and your stated policy on foreign relations, how do you explain your positions on issues regarding the U.S. involvement in other countries regarding terrorism, war, famine, or other potential threats to the U.S., both at home and or abroad?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, this is where we differentiate ourselves on this in foreign policy. You know, I agree with the president on America First foreign policy of bringing the troops home. stop the nation building, stop the endless wars, have a clear objective when we go to war, and actually have a constitutional basis for that objective. You know, the Afghan papers came out just last year. We've been in Afghanistan for almost 20 years, and even the general said that we have no clear objective what's going on. You know, the nation building, endless wars, it's really it takes a lot of money as well, but not only the blood and the treasure of our generation, our sons and daughters. And so one of the most important aspects of being a congressman is to actually debate the issues of war, and we go to war. And I take that very seriously. You know, we swear an oath to the Constitution. We've got to follow every bit of it. You know, and the founding fathers put in place Article 1, Section 8 for that specific reason, because they had learned that the kings would bypass Parliament all the time and go to war unilaterally. And so to get back to that, you know, we're not going to always have great presidents like President Trump, who has shown immense restraint when it comes to the issues of war. You know, we have a Democrat in there that's going to go to war overnight, and then the Congress is going to advocate their duty away to the executive. So as a congressman, I will advocate for getting back to a constitutional basis when it comes to declaring war and debating war openly. That's what we should do. That's respectful to our military and our veterans. It's respectful to every American, because the issues of war is ultimately is one of the most important issues as a congressman.
Andrew?
Thank you. Well, as a 28-year Navy veteran with 3 combat tours in Iraq and Kuwait, I fully understand what war is. Why? Because I've been there. I have executed war 3 times, and I understand what war is. And I know that taking out a terrorist like Soleimani is not an act of war. In fact, that's a very necessary execution by the Commander-in-Chief of the United States to keep America safe. That's what has to happen. When we have terrorists that are overseas, we need to eliminate, we need to find where they are, and we need to use that actionable intelligence to eliminate those terrorists before they do anything on our home soil. You know, if Bill Clinton back in 1996 would have eliminated Osama bin Laden when he had the opportunity to, we would never have had 9/11. So that's one of the things that is the responsibility of the military all the way up to the Commander-in-Chief. So, so that would be my foreign policy of keeping America safe by using our military and our military assets overseas to eliminate the terrorist threats that affect our country.
I do believe that you guys have answered 14 questions. So that concludes our questions for tonight. And now we want to give these gentlemen who are vying for your support to represent you as your next congressman the opportunity to issue a closing statement and solidify why it is that you should vote for them as your next elected official. By a toss of a coin, Mr. Clyde will go first.
Thank you. Thank you to Towns County GOP for hosting this debate tonight, and a special thank you to all of our first responders on the front lines at this unique time. I'm Andrew Clyde. I'm a conservative Christian, a combat veteran, and a gun store owner. If you want a proven combat fighter who's been through the trials of war both overseas against terrorist regimes and right here on our home soil against the corrupt IRS, then I'm your candidate. If you want someone who will defend the innocent unborn, who believes that life begins at conception and ends at natural death, and who has proven his commitment through his support of our local crisis pregnancy center, then I'm your candidate. If you want a congressman who has an A rating from the National Rifle Association, who knows how to protect and defend gun rights, enshrined in our Second Amendment, because I've been doing it for 30 years already, then I'm your choice. I won't give an inch. I will help restore what we have lost to the liberal left when it comes to the Second Amendment. We need a wall on the border. Everyone must come here legally, and so if you want a fighter with that conviction, then I ask that you vote for me. I'm the only candidate in this election endorsed by Georgia's lone Freedom Caucus member, Congressman Jody Hice of the 10th Congressional District, who has been in the trenches fighting against overreaching government. To quote Congressman Hice, Andrew has done more to deliver tangible results for the American people as a private citizen than most elected officials do in their entire time in office. Twice I fought big government and won. I'm also endorsed by Towns County's own Senator John Wilkinson. John said his Christian commitment, military service, and support for our first responders is impressive. I believe he will make the tough votes and support our president and farmers. He has my support. Almost a dozen sheriffs in the 9th District have endorsed my candidacy. Those sheriffs are supporting me because they know I'm the candidate who will support law enforcement and first responders. I'm running to be your next congressman because I believe we need people in Washington who are fighters and will stand on conservative values because they have those values deeply inside them. Please go to ClydeForCongress.com to learn more about me. To see my Fox News interview, I ask for your prayers, ask for your vote. Please vote Andrew Clyde for Congress, Soli Deo Gloria. Thank you.
Mr. Gurtler.
Having me tonight, we're running this campaign on a proven conservative voting record. For 4 years straight, I've been named Georgia's most conservative legislator for a reason, because I am a Republican and I act like it and I vote like it. So that's what sets us apart. You know, that proven conservative record of actually following through with the things that I said I would do. Never voting for tax increases, pushing through the most pro-life legislation in the nation with the heartbeat bill, introducing the most pro-gun legislation in the state with constitutional carry, and have Governor Kemp's support on that now. You know, President Trump needs proven conservative fighters that are willing to take the hard stands. For 4 years straight, I've been taking the hard stands against the budget when no other Republican would do it. For 4 years straight, I've been calling out the corruption when I see it. And also, for 4 years straight, I've been voting for no tax increases and always voting for the limited government conservative principles that we hold dear here in the mountains. You know, that's what sets us apart in this campaign. I've seen so many people get involved in politics for all the right reasons. They say all the right things on the campaign trail, and everybody knows this. When they get up to DC or they get to the state capitals, they change. It happens all the time. About 99% of people do this. The reason I ran for office in the first place was because I was sick of people doing that. I've never changed. I never will. I'll be the Republican that everybody can trust to actually uphold those principles and those values that founded this country, and that so many people want to see restored in our country, and they're so desperate to see this restored. That's why they elected Donald Trump. That's why this district is the most conservative district in America. And I hope that I can earn everybody's vote on August 11th in voting for the proven conservative in this race. So thank you so much.
Ladies and forum for tonight's 9th Congressional candidates, my name is Rebecca Yardley, and it has been my pleasure to be your moderator this evening. We want to thank the Towns County Republican Party and their chairman, Ms. Betsy Young, for hosting this forum. And we also want to thank Hightower Creek Vineyard for the beautiful venue by which they allowed us to have this venue or this debate at. The gentlemen both to my right and left from me, Mr. Andrew Clyde and Mr. Matt Gurtler, are vying for your support to be your next congressional representative in CD9. We encourage you to exercise that right to vote on August the 11th, but we also want to make sure that you know that early voting has already begun as of July 20th. Don't miss the opportunity to have your voice heard in the 9th Congressional District. This concludes our debate. God bless and good night.